Okay, Mr. Secretary, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. The issues of immigration and border security are of great relevance, not only here in Houston and Texas, but obviously nationally and internationally, and ones that we here at the Baker Institute are addressing through the work of our newly created Mexico Center, which we have established as a truly binational policy research center dedicated to forging a sustainable U.S.-Mexico relationship based on shared interests in the areas of trade, health, energy, infrastructure, security, and other issues. Today, we are truly honored to host the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson, who will address some of these important subjects. Mr. Secretary, you must have the most difficult job in Washington, other than President Obama's job. Prior to being sworn in as the fourth Secretary of Homeland Security in 2013, Secretary Johnson led a very distinguished legal career, both inside and outside of government. His detailed bio is in your program. His record of public service includes appointments as General Counsel of the Department of the Air Force under President Clinton, General Counsel of the Defense Department under President Obama, where he oversaw the legal aspects of our nation's counterterrorism policies, and he co-authored, among other things, the report that paved the way for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2010. He's an alumnus of Morehouse College and Columbia Law School and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Please join me in welcoming the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's good to be here. Let me also acknowledge Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who has been with me for much of my visit here to Houston today and yesterday. I also want to acknowledge my good friend Mark Shapiro, who steered me in the direction of the Baker Institute when I called him and asked for his advice about where to speak here today. For reasons that we need not go into, but Mark knows full well that I like to use visuals in my presentations, which I will do so here today. Thank you again for being here, distinguished guest. 2 years ago, a public survey was conducted in which the following question was asked. Just your best guess, compared with 10 years ago, do you think the number of immigrants entering the U.S. illegally today is higher, lower, or about the same? A majority surveyed, or 55%, said higher. In fact, the opposite is true. Apprehensions on the southern border, which are a direct reflection of total attempts to cross the border illegally, have declined significantly over the last 15 years and are a fraction of what they used to be. There is a lot of emotion and partisanship wrapped around the subject of immigration. Facts are too often drowned out by demagoguery, suspicion, exaggeration, and misperception. Frankly, it has also been the case that for too long, not enough immigration data has been shared publicly by the Department of Homeland Security, my department, and its immigration components. This too breeds suspicion and misperception to fill the void. I am on a mission to separate fact from fiction about immigration in the public mind and share more information. I am pleased to have the opportunity to do so here at the James A. Baker Institute in Houston. In fact, over the last 15 years, across the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations, our government has invested more in border security than at any point in the history of this nation. In fact, over the last 15 years, the number of apprehensions on our southwest border has declined significantly from a high of 1.6 million in the year 2000 to a range of 300 to 400,000 in recent years. We had a setback last summer when the number of migrants, most notably unaccompanied children and adults with children, illegally crossing our southern border into South Texas spiked to unprecedented levels. We responded aggressively, and the numbers fell off sharply almost immediately. In fact, overall apprehensions on our southern border this fiscal year are now 34% less than they were at the same time last year. If that rate continues for the remaining 4 months of this fiscal year, apprehensions of those attempting to cross our southern border illegally will be at the lowest point since the 1970s. In fact, over the last 15 years, the estimated number of undocumented immigrants in this country grew to a high of about 12.2 million in 2006, dropped to around 11.3 million, and has stopped growing for the first time since the 1980s. In fact, there were 10 executive actions the President and I announced last November to fix our broken immigration system, only one of which is the subject of litigation. Overall, these actions are devoted to strengthening border security, prioritizing the deportation of dangerous criminals, promoting and increasing access to citizenship, supporting high-skilled businesses and workers, and a number of other things to reform our immigration system. 9 out of 10 of these initiatives are well underway. Over the last 15 years, while other government agencies have faced cutbacks and limits in these times of fiscal constraint, our national leaders in Congress and the executive branch have chosen to build our U.S. Border Patrol to an unprecedented level in resources. Today's Border Patrol is itself one of the largest agencies of our government, with a budget of $3.5 billion, a total of 22,000 personnel, 20,499 Border Patrol agents, and the largest ever level of technology and equipment. 15 years ago, we had 8,619 Border Patrol agents dedicated to the southwest border. In 2015, that number is 17,796 and growing. 15 years ago, we had just 77 miles of fence across the southwest border. Today, there is about 700 miles of total fence across the southwest border. 15 years ago, we had few, if any, underground sensors to detect illegal migration at the southwest border. Today, we have 11,863 of these devices. 15 years ago, the Border Patrol had 56 aircraft. Today, the number is 119. 15 years ago, the Border Patrol had no unmanned aerial vehicles. Today, we have 6 of these for surveillance of illegal activity over the southwest border. 15 years ago, the Border Patrol had 1 mobile surveillance system. Today, we have 39. 15 years ago, we had little, if any, mobile video surveillance capability. Today, we have 179 of these. 15 years ago, we had 140 remote video surveillance systems. Today, we have 272 of these. Today, the Border Patrol has the largest deployment of people, vehicles, aircraft, boats, and equipment along the southwest border in its 90-year history. And this nation's long-term investment in border security has produced significant positive results over those years. As I said before, illegal migration into this country peaked in the year 2000, reflected by over 1.6 million apprehensions that year. In fact, illegal migration into this country has dropped considerably since then, reflected by the decline in total apprehensions from 1.6 million in 2000 to around 400,000 a year in recent years. Last fiscal year, the number of apprehensions on the southwest border was 479,371. The increase in fiscal year 2014, which you see reflected there, was due mostly to the unprecedented spike in illegal migration into the Rio Grande Valley sector of the border in South Texas. Almost all of it came from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. It consisted of large numbers of unaccompanied children and adults with children. In fact, more than 53% of all apprehensions across the southwest border in fiscal year 2014 were just in the Rio Grande Valley sector. In response, we did a number of things. We put additional resources, additional border security, and law enforcement resources into South Texas. We opened new processing centers across the Southwest to handle the additional illegal migration. We reassigned hundreds of Border Patrol agents to the Rio Grande Valley sector. We dramatically reduced the time it takes to repatriate adults. We added additional flights to repatriate people back faster to their home countries. We dedicated resources to the prosecution of the criminal smuggling organizations, the coyotes, that were inducing people to take the long, dangerous journey from Central America. We launched a renewed, aggressive public messaging campaign in Central America, highlighting the dangers of the journey and correcting the misinformation the coyotes are putting out about supposed free passes or permisos if you come to the United States. The President, the Vice President, and I all engaged with the leaders of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to coordinate our responses. We established in-country refugee processing centers in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to enable parents lawfully in the U.S. to apply to have their children in Central America interviewed there and brought here safely and legally. We created more detention space in Dilley and Karnes, Texas. Now let me say something about additional immigration detention. Last summer, a large part of the spike we saw consisted of unaccompanied children. By law, the Department of Homeland Security transferred those children to the Department of Health and Human Services, which was then required to promptly place them in a setting that is in the best interest of the child. Another large part of the spike was adults who brought their children with them. Prior to last year, out of 34,000 beds for immigration detention in all of my department, we had only 95 for adults with children as they waited for resolution of their immigration cases. We needed to build more, and we did. There are objections to family residential centers, and I want to address them. In fact, the number of families who are apprehended at the southern border has declined dramatically since last summer. In fact, most families apprehended at the southern border are not detained. They are released and instructed to appear in court for their immigration case. Even among those who arrive at family residential centers, most are released on conditions intended to secure their appearance at court for their immigration cases. In fact, as of April 25th, 70% of family members detained had a length of stay less than 60 days, and 50% under 30 days. But we understand the sensitive and unique nature of detaining families, and we are committed to continually evaluating it. Several weeks ago, we began a new initiative to enroll families apprehended crossing the border illegally into our Alternatives to Detention program. We want to put more people, including families, in our Alternatives to Detention program. This is reflected in our budget request to Congress for fiscal year 2016, which seeks funding to expand our capacity for this program from 36,000 participants today to 53,000 participants in 2016. We've recently undertaken a number of other new measures concerning family residence centers. They include the following. First, as of last week, we began a review of the cases of any families detained beyond 90 days and every 60 days thereafter to evaluate whether detention during the pendency of their immigration case is still appropriate. Priority is being given to the review of cases of families who have been in these residential centers the longest. Second, we have discontinued invoking general deterrence as a factor in custody determinations in all cases involving families. Third, we are creating a federal advisory committee of outside experts to advise the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and me concerning family residence centers. Fourth, we're undertaking additional measures to ensure access to counsel, attorney-client meeting rooms, social workers, educational services, comprehensive medical care, and continuous monitoring of the overall conditions at these centers. Beginning in mid-June 2014, the number of illegal migrants crossing into South Texas dropped sharply. What you see here are the number of unaccompanied children. This too dropped sharply beginning almost exactly a year ago, June 10th, 2014. Illegal migration by parents who brought their children followed a similar sharp downward path in June 2014. So far this year, we have not seen a return of the spike from last year or anything close to it. In fiscal year 2014, through the month of May, apprehensions on our southern border were 323,583. 323,583. Through the month of May of this fiscal year, total apprehensions on our southern border are at 213,145, a 34% decrease. If this pace continues, and I'm not saying it will necessarily, through the last third of this fiscal year, the total will be the lowest since 1972. The bottom line of all of this is, in recent years, the total number of those who attempt to illegally cross our southwest border has declined dramatically, while the percentage of those who are apprehended has gone up. Put simply, it's now much harder to cross our border illegally and evade capture than it used to be, and people know that. I've been talking about this for over 6 months. The mainstream media is finally starting to report it themselves. On May 15th, the Houston Chronicle published a story headlined, quote, "Immigration debate rages on while border arrests drop," end quote. On May 28th, the Washington Post ran a front page story with the headline, "Migrant flow at border abates," followed by the report, "As the Department of Homeland Security continues to pour money into border security, evidence is emerging that illegal immigration flows have fallen to their lowest levels in 2 decades. On May 12th, the Washington Times ran a front page story entitled, "Illegal Border Crossings Down Due to Refuting Permiso Myth." Finally, on May 5th, the Wall Street Journal ran an opinion piece which basically makes my case for me. Quote, "Immigration debate caught in a time warp. The premise of the immigration debate, that waves of Hispanic immigrants are sweeping across our southern border, swelling the nation's population of undocumented immigrants and transforming the culture and economy, is caught in a kind of time warp, dominated by trends of decades past, and largely missing the immigration issues that really matter today. Though the numbers have in fact declined dramatically, we are not, repeat not, declaring mission accomplished. The poverty and violence that are the push factors in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador still exist. The economy in this country, a pull factor, is getting stronger. The President and I are committed to building an even more secure border and a smart strategy to get there. Our fiscal year 2016 budget proposal includes a $373 million request for improved border technology and infrastructure, to include more remote video surveillance capability, sensors, night vision detection devices, wireless sensor data link systems, relocatable towers, and replacement fence. Our executive actions also strengthen border security. As part of the executive actions, we have prioritized the removal of anyone who came to this country illegally after January 1, 2014. We have created the Southern Border and Approaches campaign to promote border security. This campaign will, for the first time, put to use in a combined and strategic way the assets and personnel of Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Coast Guard, and other resources of the department when necessary. We are discarding the stovepipes in our department. As part of our executive actions, we are also promoting and increasing access to U.S. citizenship. We are working to permit payment of the application fee by credit card. We will also launch a multilingual citizenship awareness program to encourage those who are eligible for citizenship to apply. The first phase will move forward in July, and the second phase will launch in September. We're launching a Welcoming Communities initiative in which we will work with state and local governments to promote immigrant integration. Houston, with Mayor Parker's leadership, is already a model community for this. The President's Task Force on New Americans, which Director Leon Rodriguez of USCIS leads, is hard at work implementing its strategic action plan. As part of our executive actions, we are working quickly and aggressively to implement reforms to strengthen the program that provides optional practical training for students in the STEM fields who are studying at U.S. universities. We finalized and have begun implementing a new policy that allows certain spouses of highly skilled workers on a path to a green card to apply for work authorization. As part of our executive actions, we have published guidance on the L-1B program that allows specialized foreign employees to work temporarily at an American office of a multinational company. We are improving the pay scale for our immigration enforcement personnel. As part of our executive actions, we have issued new enforcement priorities. This is clearer and sharper guidance to the field, stating that we must prioritize the use of our immigration enforcement resources on the removal of those who are dangerous criminals. Conversely, we are making it clear that we should not expend our limited resources on deporting those who have been here for years, have committed no serious crimes, and have in effect become integrated members of our society. These new priorities have been in effect since January, and we're already seeing some preliminary signs that these policies are benefiting public safety. Consistent with the new priorities, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has begun a new push in the interior of this country to search for and apprehend undocumented immigrants who have been convicted of serious crimes through Operation Crosscheck and other initiatives. Currently, 96% of all those detained by ICE and the Border Patrol fit within the top two of the three enforcement priorities. 76% of those currently detained by ICE and the Border Patrol are in the top priority. That is, convicted felons, those convicted of an offense that involves participation in a criminal street gang, those apprehended at the border while attempting to cross illegally, and anyone suspected of terrorism or espionage, or who otherwise pose a danger to national security. We have ended the controversial Secure Communities program and are replacing it with a new Priority Enforcement program. Secure Communities was a program by which our immigration personnel lodged orders known as detainers to hold individuals in local jails so that they could be handed directly over to federal authorities for immigration enforcement purposes after their time in police custody. But Secure Communities had become embroiled in political and legal controversy. A rapidly expanding list of city, county, and state governments, depending on how you count, 275 in all, enacted laws, ordinances, executive orders, and policies that limit or outright prohibit their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement personnel. We therefore acted to stop this ineffective program and the growing resistance to it. Our new Priority Enforcement program is a balanced, common sense approach to help us achieve this goal. We're now reaching out to governors, mayors, and local communities to seek cooperation with us in the new program. We're seeing good progress. For example, last month, the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors voted to encourage the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to work with us to implement the new program. Our overarching goal is to enforce our immigration laws in a way that promotes public safety, national security, and border security. Finally, we must reckon with the 11.3 million undocumented immigrants who are here in this country. More than half of them have been here for over 10 years. Many have spouses and/or children who are United States citizens or legal permanent residents. As the Washington Post noted in the story I cited earlier, a key but largely overlooked sign of ebbing flows is the changing makeup of the illegal population. Until recent years, undocumented immigrants tended to be the young men who were streaming across the border in pursuit of work. But demographic data show that the profile of the typical immigrant now is much likely someone who is 35 or older and has lived in this country a decade or more. We must reckon with these people. These people are here. They live among us, and they're not going away. They're not going to self-deport. No administration, Democratic or Republican, is going to deport this large a population of people. We simply do not have the resources to do that. Must we, should we leave these people unaccounted and unaccountable in the shadows of American life? In 2012, we created the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. As part of this program, to date, 670,000 people have come forward, submitted to a background check, and got on the books to become accountable and pay taxes. This is not citizenship, it's not lawful permanent residence, and it is not amnesty. It is a determination by the government to defer deportation for a period of 2 years and an authorization to work during that same period. President Obama and I want to go further and extend the eligibility for deferred action to parents who are not removal priorities, have kids who are citizens or lawful permanent residents, and have been here 5 years or more. Our lawyers at the Department of Justice say we have the legal authority to do this. This was one of the executive actions we announced in November. One federal district judge in Brownsville, Texas, has disagreed and temporarily enjoined this new deferred action program, along with the expansion of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program we announced at the same time. The case is on appeal, and we will continue to fight it and defend it. I believe we will prevail, as deferred action is a tool that has been in use by Republican and Democratic administrations for decades. To those in Congress who say we do not have the authority to issue deferred action without a change in law, I say, change the law. Don't just be a naysayer. According to a new poll by the Pew Research Center, 72% of the American people think immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally and meet certain requirements should be allowed to stay legally. From the perspective of Homeland Security and law enforcement, we should encourage people who have lived here for years and are not going anywhere to come out of the shadows and get on the books. We want to know who these people are, and we want to encourage them to report crime. We want these people to work on, not off the books, and pay taxes. I submit it's also the right thing to do. In the United States of America, do we say to a class of people who have lived here for years and are not going away, we know you are here, your family is here, but you are destined to live in this country as a second-class person? Or do we give them an opportunity to earn a better place? Over and over again in the life of this nation, there have been classes of people who, by virtue of their race, gender, religion, or nationality, exist on the margins of society and struggle to seek our acceptance. It has been the tradition of this great nation that ultimately we hear their claims and grant them relief. My faith in America tells me that sooner or later we will do the same here. I hope it is sooner. Thank you very much for listening.
Take some questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. The floor is open for questions. Raise your hand, identify yourself. Charles Foster, one of our eminent immigration lawyers here.
Yes, sir.
First of all, Mr. Secretary, I want to commend you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I plan to steal some of your lines.
Go right ahead.
I'm glad you brought Director Rodriguez with you.
There he is right there. While I'm at it, let me introduce our new Undersecretary for Management, Russell Dio. It was confirmed last month by the Senate by a vote of 95 to 2 in the United States Senate. Yes, sir.
My question is someone that you know very well, our former Attorney General and Governor Greg Abbott, who brought that very lawsuit, has now signed legislation to assist you. He's sending, he's authorized and has a budget to send DPS officers, our state police and Texas Guard down to the border to assist you. What do you think about that? Is it necessary?
Well, I have personally met with the governor's public safety, border security, emergency response personnel. I think that there are probably ways in which we can work together and that we have worked together. I don't know that the Guard is necessarily the answer. One of the things that a lot of people don't appreciate about the phenomenon we had last summer with the kids is that they were not trying to evade capture. They, in most instances, expected to be caught, expected to be apprehended. So they'd literally go to the straight to the first Border Patrol agent they saw, and were taken to the nearest processing center. So I think that there are probably ways in which we can work together, and I'd want to do that in a smart way with the state of Texas.
Johnny? Yeah. Tony Payan, Director of the Mexico Center. We're doing a research, some research here at the Baker Institute, the Mexico Center, that has to do with the children. And indeed, the numbers are down. I think we recently published a paper showing very much the same data, and we fully agree with you. But there is one concern, that the children that were coming to the U.S. border and being processed in the United States, and there's been some lessons learned in the United States as to how to process them right, place them while they get their hearing and so forth, is gone fine. But now Mexico has become much more active in intercepting these children in Mexico. And unfortunately, what we're finding is that these children in Mexico are not treated the same way as they are treated in the United States. In Mexico, they're not getting a hearing. Their human rights are being violated. They're being mistreated. So how can the U.S. work with Mexico to ensure that these children get the fair treatment that they deserve, even in Mexico, or perhaps not even leave their country? So how do you understand the whole chain?
Well, let me say two things. One, last summer when I traveled to Guatemala, I thought that the leaders there, including the First Lady, were heartfelt in their desire to encourage families, to encourage the youth of that country to stay at home. And I think that that public campaign helped and contributed. I also was remarkably impressed last summer. This is probably in 17 months, this might be my 10th or 12th trip to the state of Texas. And I probably have lost count by now, but this is my first trip to Houston in this office, but I have been to the RGV, I've been to Brownsville, McAllen, a lot of times. One of the things that I was most impressed with was the firm that HHS had contracted for the shelters for the kids at Lackland. I thought they did a remarkable job. When the kids first came in, and I spent a lot of time with these kids at processing centers, when they first came in, they were hot, they were exhausted, their future was uncertain. And when they were transferred to HHS and they went to the shelters, you could see their mood change, and they were receiving extraordinary care. Our processing centers are simply not equipped to deal with kids or people on a long-term basis, but the shelters that were set up here and across the nation, I thought were really, did a really outstanding job in terms of providing basic education, health for the kids, and ultimately placement. And so, and they put it all together with not a whole lot of time. Of course, it was expensive to the taxpayer, and fortunately the numbers started to decline in June and fell off pretty sharply, and they've stayed low, certainly below the levels of last year. You can see the chart there. But I was very impressed with the process we had set up and how it was working, and the good work of the contractor, who I believe was Texas-based. I can't remember the name of the firm, but I was very impressed with them. So there are some lessons learned there. And should we have another spike like that, and you know, as I'm sure you both know, much of migration is seasonal. The high watermark tends to be early summer, and we are seeing an increase as the chart reflects, but it's not an increase like last year. And I think that we have put processes in place to facilitate that, to better that, and lessons learned. And I work with my friends and colleagues in the Mexican government all the time. So we have an ongoing dialogue.
Over there?
One and then gentleman.
Yeah. I'm Russell Price. I'm a retired assistant vice president here at Rice University and the father of a Border Patrol agent.
Okay.
I'm interested in what does pay reform mean? Because the agents patrolling our border right now recently experienced pay cuts.
Well, two things. Pay reform for Border Patrol personnel was recently enacted by the Congress late last year. We had to deal with the overtime pay called AUO. And there were some problems with that system that the Office of Special Counsel pointed out last year. So in many cases I had to suspend AUO, but it was quickly replaced by the Congress late last year. And Congress recently enacted another piece of legislation, I think maybe last month, to make sure that that pay reform was delivered even faster to our Border Patrol agents. In terms of the pay reform that I referred to, I was referring to our enforcement personnel who work for ICE, who are capped out at GS-9 in many circumstances. And that has contributed to the morale in that organization. And so last year, when we were looking at how to reform and revise our enforcement priorities, one of the things I heard from our ERO personnel was that they have a pay system that caps them out at GS-9. And I said, well, given that we are asking you to perform more and more a law enforcement mission and go after convicted criminals, I think you need to be on the same pay scale with law enforcement personnel. So we're working to deliver that and make that happen.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, my very close friend and Salvadorian national Douglas Mantivar, and actually owes his life to a congresswoman down here for the record. At any rate, he was raped at the Joe Corley Detention Center here in Texas, as was the 18-year-old boy in the bunk below him. And he did report it, was laughed at by the supervising officer, and received no medical or psychological care. I have a number of other, I won't tell them, but firsthand stories about things like this in our Texas detention centers. And I want to know how we can work with you to stop this kind of treatment, because it's pretty appalling.
Well, one of the things that I think makes a tremendous difference, thank you for pointing that out. One of the things that I think makes a tremendous difference is on a local, regional level, we have periodic, regular meetings between those who represent detainees and migrants and those who represent immigration reform organizations and our Border Patrol immigration enforcement personnel. So one of the advantages, I think, of putting together this campaign plan is it brings together all of the resources of my department in this area, in this state, together toward one mission so that they coordinate and they cooperate together more. And one of the ways that I think that we ought to encourage our people to do that is through roundtables, DHS roundtables, which work well around the country, and I want to promote more of that. In terms of conditions of detention, it's something that I continually pay attention to as the secretary at the cabinet level department. I've been to a number of these facilities myself, here in Texas, here in Chicago, and elsewhere. And so it's something that I'm continually paying close attention to. And so I'm interested to hear more about this incident. I think I've heard of it, but I'm interested to hear more about it.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, the chaos that has developed in the Middle East in the last few years has created tremendous refugee problems and dislocation problems. How is that affecting the U.S.? Are we seeing an increase in the number of applicants? How are we dealing with this? And is this something that could
Yes.
develop like you had in Vietnam?
Not quite those numbers, but Director Rodriguez here is overseeing the refugee resettlement process. His people go to the Middle East to screen refugees, Syrian refugees in particular. We're seeing more and more of them, as you know. There are vast numbers who have left that country. And so we have and we will continue to screen people for resettlement. Just before I came here, I was with a Syrian American group talking about refugee resettlement issues. I came, this far away from a gentleman who had just resettled here 5 months ago. And one of the things that he said to me through a translator was that he was persecuted by his regime. And I said, well, I am your regime now. I am your Minister of Homeland Security, and you will not be persecuted in this country. And I gave him a hug. So he told a moving story about the situation that his family faced. And refugee resettlement is part of who we are as Americans. It's part of our values. So we understand and recognize that we need to participate in this.
Thank you.
Stephanie Rudd, could you address what your perception is of the level of drug smuggling and other crimes and whether that's being more effectively contained now?
Drug smuggling, orchestrated, led by cartels in Central South America is a very sophisticated, organized operation. Large transnational criminal organizations are becoming even larger and more sophisticated. So part of what I want to do, consistent with this combined campaign I've talked about, is devote a lot of our resources to anti-narcotics activities coming from the Department of Defense. I'm familiar with U.S. Southcom, U.S. Northcom. I've spoken and I speak regularly with General Kelly, as commander of U.S. Southcom, about our anti-narcotics activities, our interdiction activities. And so we are focusing not only on migrants, but how we can deal with transnational criminal organizations. They are becoming increasingly sophisticated and adept at what they do.
Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, would you like to say something about congressional prospects or legislation?
You want me now, or you want me to wait till the questions are forward?
No, just very briefly now.
Mr. Shapiro has his hand up.
Okay.
I just had one quick question, Mr. Secretary. A lot of the undocumented aliens are here, came to this country legally, and have overstayed their visa.
Yes, right.
How do you deal with that, or how can we deal with that better as a country?
Well, one of the things that, frankly, we are seeking to do, and I'm undertaking to do a better job of, is estimate exactly what the size of that population is. It's sort of become gospel in the narrative that it's 40%. I don't know that it's as high as 40%. I have seen a report with a very different number, but I'm also concerned that we have the right metrics for measuring visa overstays. And I hope that soon we will have a report, or at least a preliminary report with an estimate of what that that population is, but those who abuse the visa system, those who engage in fraud with our immigration system are priorities for removal. They are an effort to find because they're in the interior and very often they've been here for years, but also a lot of them are just not, they haven't been convicted of crime. They're not priorities for removal necessary, but it's part of that population that I showed you on the chart there.
Mr. Secretary, one of the, I'm a retiree, Brendan Godfrey. One of the issues.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. One of the issues you mentioned briefly was highly skilled immigrants.
Yes.
And that can take two forms, of course, H-1B visas.
Yes.
As well as green cards.
Yes.
There was an article in the New York Times just a few days ago about the Disney company firing a number of its employees to replace them with H-1B visa holders. There have been other stories about California Edison doing the same thing. I guess the question I'm posing is, what are the prospects of slashing the number of H-1B visas while at the same time commensurately increasing the number of green cards?
Well, increasing the number of green cards,
Well, at the same time,
write your congressman. That is capped legally. It's been at the same level now for a very, very long period of time. A lot of people would like to see that ceiling raised. One of the executive actions that I referred to here, which you picked up on, we believe that there are ways to get green cards into the hands of people faster. There is some inefficiency built into that process, very definitely, where a number of visas are simply left on the table year after year. And through some good study and work, we've identified ways in which we think we can streamline it, deliver it faster. I believe that the 1B visa program is a good program for high-skilled workers. I believe, and I'm not an expert on this, the expert on this is right there, that an economic analysis needs to be done before we issue them on job displacement in this country, but I happen to believe that it's a good program, and I know it has popular support in Congress as well.
Okay, let's see, we have many people, okay, gentlemen here.
I have a question. I just was listening to you that you talked to this refugee through a translator. I'm very active in the area of adult literacy in the Houston area. And once these refugees come in, we have many organizations here who try to teach them English because without that they are totally helpless. My question is your department going to allocate some budget to help these refugees so that they can melt into the society, learn English, and these organizations who are teaching these adult refugees, they are seeking funds. Can they come to your department?
Well, I've been very impressed with the Syrian American community here in the Houston area. It strikes me as a pretty close-knit community and a strong community who embrace refugees, many of whom are people who need help, need language skills, and a lot of that work can be done in the community. It can be done by organizations in the community. I do know that there is a process by which we make decisions about how to resettle, where to resettle, but a lot of that work has to be done in the community, and I think that in this area, in the Houston area, folks seem to do a pretty good job of it.
Congresswoman is going to make a few comments on the prospects of Congress acting on.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.